Dr. Lance Fisher. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Accounting at Spear School of Business, and I typically teach financial accounting topics and cost accounting topics, which I enjoy. An accountant through and through. In any case, I've been asked to talk a little bit about how to sort of quick changes or things we can do to make not-for-profits be more effective.
So what should we know about nonprofits?
Well, they're exciting. That's the first thing. If a person is involved in a not-for-profit agency or work, there's they talk about multiple benefits, not only just working there, but then getting the sort of the love or the feel of accomplish something for real, or sort of attacking something in your community that you want to address. But specifically, when you look across not-for-profit agencies, you sort of look at agencies that are run by groups that want to do something good, and they're sort of big-hearted and have a feel for something. They've found something in their community that's not working right. So you have a lot of people that jump in there, and what you find when you look down in not-for-profit agency world, though, is sometimes we're not taking business best practices into the realm. And so, in effect, the not-for-profit agencies aren't as effective at getting done what they want to accomplish. And so a couple things that I sort of, in my time in not-for-profit agencies, have found is if we just do a couple things, we're going to be a lot more effective. Some of it takes a little bit extra work, some of it takes a lot of thinking, but I think the first one I would suggest is sort of making sure you have a good strategic plan built for your agency, sort of an encompassing plan both in what you're trying to accomplish, how you fit in with the community, and then internally sort of how you're arriving at doing that. And then as part of that, supporting that, is sort of looking at the sort of cash component of it, or the funding component, the cost of providing those services. If you can get those two things done, you're going to be doing a lot better in your community. So sort of starting back on the first item, the notion of the strategic plan, what I found that works well is if whatever group or thing that you're targeting, so let's say you're doing elder care or mental health issues in a community, or child protection or adult protection for that matter, you sort of go out there, and if you're able to go find the best practices that they're doing in large cities, or do your research and say, how are they addressing this issue in X, Y, and Z city? And then you say, okay, well, once you identify the cities that are doing it well, and then you sort of say, okay, now here's my community, here's the size of my community. What is happening in my community, or what are the needs, what are different than they have in the big cities? Maybe I'm in a rural community or a smaller sort of community like Tulsa or Fort Smith or something like that. So you may not need a San Francisco side solution, and you may not even have all the issues there in that community. But once you identify what they're doing, then look to see how you can scale it to your community. And once you say, okay, this is what it should look like in my community, then if you're able to then identify the agencies, your partner agencies, not just your agency, but all the other partner agencies in your community that are working in this area, as I said, mental health or child protection or homeless services. So you sort of look to say, okay, we need not only human services in that area, but we may need shelter options, or we may need training options, sort of employers and the rest to sort of build it. So you think about the different services or the shelter options you need, and then identify who's providing it at each level. And once you do that analysis, I think many times not-for-profit agencies find is that there are a lot of gaps. You've rushed in, you're helping the people, you're doing whatever, frequently it's just enabling, but you're just helping in there, but you don't realize that you're churning and doing as hard as you can, but there's not an agency there that's effective in taking them from you on the next step. So once you do the analysis of the continuum of care, what it should look like, then you can see the gaps. And it turns out, once you see the gaps, then you can say, okay, how can we program better knowing the gap exists? Or is it possible that we can go out and get other grants that'll help us expand into the area where the gap in coverage is? And in turn, ultimately, the whole continuum of care is better off. What I found is if you take that sort of map to all your partner agencies in your community and say, this is how we see you, this is how we see us, this is a whole, do you know of anyone that's in that group, right? And many times it helps them define who they are as well. So they may not even know who they are. And if you're able to identify what we need in a continuum of care, then it turns out that the whole continuum itself becomes more effective. Just because one agency goes out and does the continuing care. So that would be, again, the first sort of thing. Then you sort of dial back inside the firm or not-for-profit agency and say, okay, now how do we get the work done? And typically, a couple fixes specifically identify in best practices the staffing type. Again, in not-for-profit agencies, frequently you see people with big hearts rushing in. They've either had the trauma or tragedy of their own family or in the community, and so they want to go in and help, but they're not properly trained. And especially if you're in a social work world, the burnout rate for employees is so high. And so as an agency, the cost of training for all these new employees that come through and want to help, and all of a sudden they're burnout because they got so emotionally involved in one of the clients, then you got to start over again. And that hurdle is costly. So if you're in a social work realm or a realm that needs sort of good training, people know, workers that know how to put a barrier and not take home the emotion, trauma from the workplace, you'll do much better. You reduce your cost center. If we can jump to the funding side. Now, I'm an accounting guy, so of course I'm always about the money. But what I've found as well is just like any business division that has grocery stores or warehouses or manufacturing facilities, if we can take each of the cost functions, administrative, fundraising, i.e. like sales in normal companies, or our programming costs, if we can sort of delineate those programs and then identify the costs of those, well, administrative and the fundraising, those things are sort of set aside. It's costly, but you worry about it separately. The most important thing, of course, if you're not-for-profit, is for it to function properly. So in programming, if you have an agency with multiple programming types, for example, in the homeless services world, you may have an emergency shelter that's a nighttime it's sort of sleepover spot. You may have a day resource center that picks up all homeless, including those not in your nighttime shelter. You may have supportive housing that helps individuals exit sort of in a 6 to 9 month housing program. Those are completely distinct sort of groupings, and it turns out that funding for those come from the federal level, come from different places. So we can get FEMA funding for a day shelter system. You can get HUD money for the nighttime emergency and nighttime long-term. So different agencies. But if you don't know, if you don't sort of think about your agency in its different programming types, then in fact you'll be out there saying, oh, I know about this grant, but I think it's the only thing that's there because I haven't defined my agency. But if we're also able to then define, for example, nighttime exit homeless long-term for women with children, there are plenty of grants and opportunities for that specific customer type or client type. But it's also the case that when you're doing fundraising, individuals will sort of focus on, I don't mind helping, I may not care to help this class of individual, but I don't have no problem helping women with children or veterans or whatever else it is. And so once you've identified your programming, then you can target your fundraising specifically to that and identify, are we covering the costs of that programming function? And if not, then we can drive fundraising to make sure that each program is self-supporting. So those are sort of if we can do a strategic plan, using best practices, and then look at our financials, set up our financials so we can look at programming and costs of our funding streams for each. I think those are probably the two easiest things. Well, it's hard. You have to do it, but the two things are going to get you most effective, sort of the bump as quickly as you can.